Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Coates. I'm the host of the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. Welcome to episode 302. Today's guest, Andres Vargas, is someone I've been working on getting for a while. It finally worked out. Andres has a Master of Science. He's a certified strength and conditioning coach and a strength and nutrition coach for his business, The Strength Cave. And today we get into a whole bunch of how to navigate social media training information, what's solid, what's nonsense, what's sensational, what's overrated, and should coaches specialize in training or nutrition or offer both, and why Andres offers both. Stay tuned. Andres Vargas, it's actually really awesome to have you on the show. You and I have been circling each other for a while. We've actually chatted about having you on. It's taken a little while, so grateful it finally worked here on
Yeah, no,
on a
thanks.
Sunday
Thanks so
morning.
much. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's just a pleasure to talk to somebody like yourself, somebody else in the industry, like-minded. So, it's a pleasure.
And I use this podcast often. Any longtime listeners heard me say this before. Some of my guests are old friends, people I've known for in the industry in my travels, and some of my guests are people. It's one of my first opportunities to get to know you a little bit more, and then share you with the people who are listening. So I want them to come check out your work, go follow you. We'll talk about that after. But I wanted to get into something. So you tend to do a really good job with both exercise science, the training side of things, and the nutrition side. I'm going to go deeper in that theme, but I want to start here. And I want this to be useful to the everyday user as much as the trainers, because I think trainers are confused. But I actually think the training is getting more confusing. We're seeing
Mm,
more complicated, different topics. I'll give some examples, but I think one of the phenomenon is that there are more people trying to brand around training concepts and ideologies. And of course, it's going to confuse trainers and the end user. So we've got TikTok biomechanics, which is totally out of hand. We've got a lot of optimization stuff going on, which gets a little bit crazy. I've seen the resurgence of like a lot of Mike Menser philosophy stuff, which is
yeah, like,
full of some good stuff and some total rubbish. And we've got the industry
yeah.
experts literally arguing amongst themselves. How does the trainer figure this shit out? How does the end user supposed to navigate this stuff?
That's a great question, and I do think that more and more, the more access to information we have, the more confused we seem to get. It's just like this buffet of information that nobody knows which one to choose and which one to believe. But I think it goes back to hopefully having some understanding of physiology, some understanding of exercise science as a trainer. As a layperson, it's a little bit harder because if you don't have any training in that, everybody seems like an expert because everybody seems to know more than you do. I think when you see somebody who is trying to, maybe put their own branding on a style of training or put their own sort of label on it to make it seem like magic sauce. It's kind of the same thing that we see in the nutrition space where there's like this special diet or special method that is going to bring you to this goal that hopefully whoever's consuming the media that they're putting out will resonate with, right? And so it's like, oh yeah, I really want to build muscle as fast as possible, or I really want to be as athletic as possible, or whatever the adjective is. And so whenever you see that, I think there's a little bit of maybe you need to take pause. Is it really that they're trying to say that is quote unquote special about this way of training, or are there similarities to maybe everything else that I kind of see on Instagram or TikTok or whatever social media it is, and is that sort of the similarities between everything where the actual magic happens, right?
I mentioned Menser, and this is probably one of my favorite examples. So for everybody listening, if you're not familiar with Mike Menser, he's a fairly famous bodybuilder. He would have been one of the Arnold era contemporaries, maybe just a little bit after that. Now he's been dead for a while. And what there are two sort of concepts that we're seeing around the Menser stuff. One is low volume, and the other one is intensity. So we've seen a lot of this volume versus intensity sort of ideological battle within the industry in some places. And I think it's an oversimplified, if anything, I think it's like volume with intensity, right? But
Sure.
I think my issue with a lot of the Menser stuff is I think a lot of people fundamentally don't understand what was going on with Mike. So let's go through a few things, and I want to hear your comments. But number one is Mike, from what I understand, actually built his physique for the most part with more traditional, higher volume plus intensity methods, which were common in the era. Arnold Schwarzenegger was definitely a very high volume bodybuilder, and most of his contemporaries were. Two, these guys, and Dorian Yates is another common example of
Mhm.
someone who's cited for lower volume, higher intensity. But number one is these guys are some of the absolute genetic elite. So you can't extrapolate necessarily to everybody what will work. Two, they had access to absolutely cutting edge pharmacology at the time. Let's just put it that way, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
going to play a role in it. Three, a lot of the time they were doing a fair bit of warm up stuff before they got to this one mega all out past failure, super crazy set, drop sets, you name it, forced reps, to where honestly the volume of what they were doing was probably a lot closer to the higher volume stuff that people argue against anyway.
Yeah.
And Mike for sure turned around and sort of branded around this methodology later in his career after having already built his physique. So, what are your thoughts on all this stuff?
My thoughts are sort of when you become more advanced like Mike was, it makes sense that you have to pick and choose your spots when you're going to go as, hit an RPE 10 or go to failure or do a drop set. Um, Doing that for every single set for a high volume session is going to be exhausting. And as a more advanced athlete who can go deeper into the well, so to speak, with their nervous system, that's just going to be so fatiguing to be able to do that over and over again, right? So they built sort of the volume with those warm up sets, like you said, and to get their body ready to perform this one all out set to where now they're at a place with their physique, with their nervous system, and everything else that they can go that hard and actually reach that failure point, and it'll be stimulating enough for them to get some gains from it. But that's not necessarily a very viable way to go about it for people who are on the other side of the spectrum.
There's something in there, and the fatigue thing's huge. And I want to bring this out. When you consider these individuals, these examples, they're very large, they're very muscular, and therefore they're very strong. So from a recovery standpoint, they're dealing with pretty high loads, extremely fatiguing on the nervous system. I'm not so worried about the cardiovascular system here, but certainly like musculoskeletal fatigue, stress, tendons, you name it. So what's I think lost, the more load you're working with, there's a lot more stimulation on all those sort of things. And a good a good analogy to this is oftentimes anybody who's trained will notice that women, on average, will recover between sets faster than men. Right?
Faster.
That's
Yeah.
usually what we observe. Now, I think
Mhm.
fundamentally women also seem to like to train that way. I'll often use supersets more with women than with men. On average, women are going to have less muscle mass. That's on average, right? Their frames, especially upper body, breadth of their shoulders, etc., shoulder muscle mass, all that stuff. They have less muscle mass. So on average, and we're not talking about the outliers and the really really highly trained women who are crazy strong, like they're amazing, but on average, they're going to be using less load, right?
Mhm.
And less load ultimately means less tissue disruption, less nervous system disruption. And so what happens? They're actually able to recover from those things intraset or interset faster. So if you get to the other extreme where you get Dorian
Right.
Yates, the sheer amount of load, nervous system disruption, tissue disruption is so high that, like you said, someone's simply just not going to be able to do repeated bouts of this stuff at a really, really high intensity level. And I think a lot of people
Right.
don't fundamentally understand this.
Yeah, and I think another thing before I forget is like somebody's going to probably bring up like, well, there's Dorian Yates, and then there's like somebody like Ronnie Coleman and how he trained with this super high volume still and very high intensity. The weights he was using were, way more than typical bodybuilder would use. And I think that maybe that goes in the like there's well, they both built really great physiques. You can argue back and forth whose was better, but maybe that goes to as you get to that later stage of the amount of muscle that Dorian Yates and Ronnie Coleman built, it maybe only took that one all-out set for Dorian to adequately stimulate the muscles to grow, whereas Ronnie maybe already had reached that point with his first or second set of that he was doing, and those third, fourth, fifth sets that he was doing maybe weren't giving him the return that he thought, right? But he just mentally thought he needed to do that much in order to keep progressing. Um, but yeah, getting back to what you were saying, I think that that's definitely has a lot to do with it. The more muscle you have, the more fatiguing it's going to be to use all of that muscle to reach those type 2 muscle fibers and take those to fatigue. And you're so much stronger at that point that just the sheer load that you're putting on your body is something that you have to manage in order to, just survive your training, right?
And here's another one. I want to hear your thoughts on this too, because obviously Ronnie is well known for being, it, I don't want to know how to categorize it. It's like he's pretty beaten up, right? He's dealt with a lot of injuries over his career. He's suffered some health concerns. And I think sometimes people use his training style to say, hey, look, like he destroyed his body doing this stuff. And I think I don't like extrapolating evidence from anecdote. I mean, he is probably one of the most, probably the largest. I think there are bigger bodybuilders, but he's one of the biggest bodybuilders of all time. He sustained that level of muscularity and that training style for a really long time. And there's probably a relationship there. But again, you get some of the other bodybuilders at that time. Dorian Yates is, seemingly, I mean, they're all going to have like injuries over the years.
Sure.
But Dorian, Jay Cutler, a lot of these other iconic bodybuilders, Phil Heath, they're walking around and they otherwise seem like pretty normally functional human beings, whereas Ronnie's quite disabled at this point.
Yeah, unfortunately. But you go back to like the Arnold era bodybuilders who also had a very high volume, and somebody like Arnold or somebody like Franco Columbu were also lifting very heavy loads, heavy squats, heavy bench press, heavy, all the same stuff that Ronnie was doing. And obviously Father Time catches everybody, and they're not as able. Or obviously Franco is no longer with us, but somebody like those guys aren't maybe as disabled as say Ronnie is now. So you can't necessarily extrapolate that out either and say that, oh, it was a high volume training and that's why his body is beat up. It could be a lot of things. He could have been predisposed to that. He was also a cop who sat in his police cruiser for a living. That's not going to do a lot of good for your hips and your back either. So, could there be more wear and tear because of the high volume training? Perhaps, but it also, it's not fair to just pin it on that solely, just because of what you see.
You and I agree 100% on that one. Now, what about all the TikTok biomechanics? I mean, I say that sort of facetiously because
Yeah.
I think there are some really great educators and practitioners. I mean, one of my favorites would be Muscle Doc Jordan Shallow. I'm finishing up
Yeah.
Prescript Level 1. I highly endorse that course. And I think to me, he's probably, I've seen the best deep dive on training anatomy, what I would consider to be biomechanics. I don't think they really brand it as biomechanics, although I think it ultimately is a good understanding of, they talk about muscle action, muscle function, etc. And then we see a lot of like, I laugh at, this is like, not everything needs to be a single arm, cable exercise, which I think is sort of taken over a little bit. Any thoughts on helping people navigate what's valuable versus what's maybe dubious, maybe not necessarily helpful, maybe it's too in the weeds?
Yeah, and when it comes to that stuff, I think it is always going to be within the context of what the goal of the individual is. So, somebody who maybe is very focused on maximizing the growth of a particular muscle. Let's say it's the glutes or the biceps. Maybe there is some merit to the angle of which you are doing the exercise from and the foot placement, or the angle of the cable when you're doing the bicep curl or whatever. There probably is a few percentage points that you're going to gain from that. But if you're like most people, you're not nerding out about like, how do I how do I get literally like the 100% most effective stimulus on my biceps possible? You're just trying to gain some muscle. You're just trying to be active. You're just trying to have fun with it in the gym. You're trying to find some way to enjoy yourself when you're there, because most people have to really psych themselves up and convince themselves to go to the gym. Unless they have a really amazing trainer like yourself, where they're like, I just want to go hang out with this guy. You know what I mean? So, but at the end of the day, I like the I have no problem with it if that's their sort of avenue that they want to focus on, is the biomechanics of everything. I think that there's a way to do it that is more helpful than it is harmful. I think sometimes you can scare people away from like, well, you shouldn't be doing this exercise because it's not stimulating your X, Y, and Z muscle the best, or whatever. When in reality, it's like, you know, if they like that exercise and it's stimulating it even 50% as well, they're still going to get growth. They're still going to get stronger. They're still going to be doing what we want them to be doing, which is being active. And so that's kind of how I go about it.
One of my favorite things I see is with the what I like to sort of pigeonhole as TikTok biomechanics stuff is you hear a lot of things like, oh, bent over barbell rows suck for
Hmm.
hypertrophy, or other things like this. It's like, or every classic bodybuilding exercise ever sucks for hypertrophy. Here, go do the single arm cable exercise. Like,
Yeah.
if Ronnie Coleman trained this way, he would have been even better. It's like, holy shit, guys. And another concept that Jordan Shallow talks about a lot is muscular co-contraction. So it's like, it's not necessarily just about the direct stimulus you can align on the fibers of the specific muscle that you're working. That's actually smart stuff if you do it right. But it's like, okay, you're bent over doing a barbell row. Yes, chances are you will not be able, most people will not be able to take their lats to failure with the load that would stimulate their lats in a bent over barbell row. Chances are your spinal rectors or your grip or both will kick before your lats will. That being said, you're probably getting pretty good stimulation of your lats. And what do you got? We've got that's weird. Is like a little
Huh.
thumbs up bubble just popped up on the screen. I don't know
I
what that,
liked what you had to say.
it seemed to have. I did a thumbs up
Yeah.
thing, I think, here. So
Yeah.
anybody, if I ever air the videos of these, someone's going to get kind of confused. Uh, let me get back on track. That really threw me off. You're getting you have an isometric hold on your spinal rectors, your glutes, your hamstrings, and all this upper back musculature, forearms, you name it. So I'm not willing to discard a barbell row. And while I think we can look at the classic bodybuilders and say they did a lot of stupid shit, they also foundationally figured out most of the things, like the rep range thing, where it's like, a lot of the growth is in the 8 to 12, and strength is lower and endurance is higher. Well, we know now that you can build muscle at any rep range, but if you're doing mostly like, near failure sets of three, your 3 rep max, 4 rep max, it's like, that's pretty stressful on your joints, very time intensive to recover from. You're not going to get a lot of stimulus per set. So it's not at all an efficient way to train for
Yeah.
muscular, like, hypertrophy. And it doesn't work at all for shit like bicep curls. Your 3 rep max
Yeah.
bicep curl is just not a
Unless you want to tear a bicep tendon. Yeah.
totally right. Or
Yeah.
like side laterals or stuff like this. So this stuff
Yeah.
doesn't work. And then I haven't met a lot of people who consistently enjoy doing sets of 20 to 40 to
Hmm.
near failure on anything. It's torturous. It's good to like throw it in there. And what happens? A sweet spot of really efficient training tends to be that 8 to 12 rep range to near failure.
Yeah.
So it's like the bodybuilders kind of figured it out. And the science, absolutely takes it further. But when it comes down to practically training a client, like, this shit works.
Yeah.
Anyway, and it's not to
Exactly.
just, I love the research. Like, Brad Schoenfeld, I think, is amazing. He's one of the four, like, he's pretty much the preeminent researcher on muscle hypertrophy, would have done a lot of that work. Dr. Stu Phillips, they're great guys. So, like, I love what they're doing. But at the end of the day, I think practically it comes down to it. I spend most of my time with people in those classic rep ranges if their goal is muscle hypertrophy.
Yeah. I
Thoughts?
think it's I think you hit it on the head there. It's not that 8 to 12 is magic and that's where you can only build muscle. It's that just happens to be a more comfortable rep range for people to reach close enough to failure to stimulate the muscle, maximally, and B, it's a load that is not dangerous for most people. And it's also more fun and enjoyable for people in that rep range, because the set lasts a certain amount of time within that rep range. You start getting to like 15, 20, 25, 30 reps. Now it's just like a battle of attrition of when their mind's going to give up versus their muscles actually getting close to failure. And then anything less than that for the general population feels a little bit scary at first. Like, you're going to make me do 3 reps with that much weight? Like that I don't know if I can do that. And then it becomes a mind game. So then in that middle range, it's just like comfortable, both mentally and physically, for them. Getting back to your comment about the barbell, bent over barbell rows, I think one thing I've seen that people do with the science, which I love the science. I went to school and loved it, and I believe in the science, right? But is they get caught up in the weeds of like, well, that's not maximally stimulating, or we're not getting close enough to failure of the lats for it to be effective. And I think they lose sight of the fact that when we say that getting to say RPE 7 or 8 plus, 1 to 2 or even 3 reps shy of failure, as long as you get within that range, that's going to have a maximal stimulation of the muscle fibers for growth. And maybe as you get more advanced, you need to be a little bit closer, RP 8 or 9. But it's not, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that it's that you get to RPE 7 and that's when you start building muscle. Every rep before that will still build some muscle. It's just incrementally getting up to this maximal point. And so even if the lats in a bent over barbell row don't get to RPE 8 for the lats, so maybe they get to RPE 5 or 6, meaning if you had some magical ability to take your forearms and your spinal erectors out of it and you could keep going, you could get a few more reps with your lats only. It doesn't mean that those reps didn't help your lats build muscle. And it doesn't mean that the stimulus on your lats from that versus like a single arm cable pull down or something like that isn't going to be effective in another way as a different kind of stimulus. So I think people lose sight of that. They try to put everything into this sort of myopic view, and I think that that does some disservice to just strength training as a whole.
Love this. Here's another thing too. It's we don't take individual exercises in isolation. You're looking at, all right, well, if you're
Right.
not everybody trains like, bodybuilders tend to do more of like a pull day or straight up back day. Sure. And I like that sort of stuff. Gen pop, it's probably a little bit, more full body, but a lot of the time we're not doing one lat exercise in isolation if the goal is maximizing lat hypertrophy. You're probably going to sit
Right.
down and do some seated cable rows or maybe some dumbbell rows or, some vertical pulling type stuff. And across the entirety of the workout, you're probably able to take those muscle fibers to failure. Because what we're alluding to here, and I'll make it explicit, is to maximize muscle growth, we have to fatigue the largest muscle fibers. The largest muscle fibers will only effectively turn on, for to oversimplify, by getting really, really up close to failure. If we're not stimulating those larger muscle fibers by getting near failure, they're not going to get the stimulus to ultimately grow. So that's what that is all about. But it doesn't necessarily mean that every set of every exercise has to actually hit that threshold.
Yeah.
Can you said something I wanted you to explain this more because I love this. You mentioned about the mind giving up versus the body. Can you help people understand both from the everyday person, but also the trainer pushing the client failure? I think a lot of people are afraid to take relative beginners to failure because I think a lot of them don't actually have that skill. I think it's an important skill to
Mhm.
learn, but the whole idea of like your your mind telling you to give up before your muscles would actually reach failure.
I even see it. It's much more common, I guess, with more beginners or less experienced people. But I see it all the time, even in myself after 15 years of training. Right, I'm not. I'm still vulnerable to the same thing. Where you reach this point in a set where it's feeling very difficult, and your brain is trying to convince you to stop doing the thing that is difficult because your brain's trying to conserve energy most of the time. Like it's hardwired not to put itself into danger. And so you reach this point where things are burning, and this is more the case with higher rep sets, like I said, because of the fact that now it's been 30, 40, 50 seconds that you've been doing this exercise, we're getting into some different energy systems beyond just what your muscle fibers are trying to produce, where you're getting, into different energy sources. And now you're accumulating lactate that's burning. You're feeling this burn in the muscles, and your brain just says, we're kind of done with this. I think you're done. I don't think you can do another 5 reps. I think that's good for today. Um, in reality, your muscles are capable of so much more than what your brain is saying. But it's hard to get into that mindset every single time, and you have to kind of convince yourself to push past that barrier of what your mind is telling you versus what you know to be true from past experiences, right? And some days you just don't have it, and you're just there to kind of get the workout done. And some days you do.
I think that's also part of maintaining the habit, maintaining the overall fatigue load across the week, your recovery, that balance. The whole concept is it's sort of the proverbial, if someone put a gun to your head, could you do 3 to 5 more reps? Now,
Yeah,
that has to be qualified by saying like adrenaline's going to kick in there, and that changes it a little bit. It's
sure.
like that's the whole like grandmothers lifting cars off of trapped kids and stuff like that. But the body has governors against that stuff normally voluntarily. But I think most people, if really called upon, could probably squeeze out 1 to 2 more reps,
Yeah.
towards failure. So I think if I interpret the research and the science pretty clearly, it's probably in and around like if you're within about 5-ish reps, 2 to 5 reps of failure, you're probably going to get the stimulation you need to grow. But most people probably aren't very good at the skill of knowing where the true threshold of momentary muscular failure is. So we probably still want to teach people to get close to their experience of failure, which the hope is
Hmm.
it's still within that probably like that 2 to 5 threshold, even if it's not actually to their true limits. And that's the philosophy I've always taken into stuff. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I have clients who are, not as focused on building muscle. They're more focused on building strength or athleticism or just general fitness. But when they're really concerned about, I really want to put on muscle, then I have sort of a general guideline of how often I want them to go to failure, just to know what that feels like and remind themselves what that feels like, so that they can, you know, more accurately see where they got to in every set. So like if it's an accessory exercise, I might have them go to failure on that exercise maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks on the last set of the day, just to feel that, right? Oh, okay, that's what I
Yeah.
thought I was 3 reps shy, but I was really 5 reps shy on every set, kind of. But if it's a more compound, heavier exercise, I use a little bit more discretion on that, and maybe not test that quite so often because of the fatigue factor, and because of I want to make sure that they know how to handle themselves if they get into a situation, say on a squat, where they can't stand back up. Do they know how to safely get out of that if they don't have a spotter, something
Yeah.
like that?
Risk to reward.
Right.
Pivoting a little bit, you do a lot of very high level nutrition and a lot of high level training stuff. And
Mhm.
I don't know if we necessarily see that as much anymore. So I think it's a bit of a pendulum. When I first got into the industry as a trainer, we were starting to see precision nutrition, John Berardi come online, and he talked a lot about the importance of being able to understand and have a lot of knowledge about nutrition, which I 100% agree with, to be able to offer better service to your clients. And he used to talk about, trainers basically offering a concierge to everything. And I think the pendulum swung back the other way a bit more recently, where I think people just decided, no, I really like this. I want to specialize, and I'm either going to be a trainer or a nutritionist. And we've seen a very big rise in nutrition coaching in the industry. So you do both at a very high level. You're actually well educated, very well educated on both aspects of it. What are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are that I think that both approaches are great. I think if you find that you really want to specialize in one or the other, if you're a personal trainer or a coach, and You know that your efforts are better served just focusing 100% on exercise and training and exercise physiology, then that's great. I think you're going to do the best that you can and do the best for your clients, serving them in the way that you know best. The other thing to consider is whether you even want to delve into the nutrition side of things as a coach or a trainer. Because if you don't have that desire, you're not going to ultimately be benefiting them to the best that you can or the best that they deserve because you're just not interested in it yourself. You're better off partnering up with a nutritionist who that's their bread and butter. They love doing that. And maybe they don't enjoy the training side of things as much as far as, program design and personal training and all of that. But if you are somebody who likes to do both and you do have a passion and a desire study both sides of the equation as doing both because it allows me to um, a lot of times if you're a trainer you're going to get questions about nutrition from your clients, and if you're a nutritionist you're going to get questions from your clients about training. And so I like to be able to offer them the full package. I know what kind of training I'm giving them and vis-a-vis what kind of nutrition they should be having for the training I'm giving them, whether I'm looking at even blood work to see is the training that I'm giving them a little bit too high impact, and we're seeing some things in the blood work that are troubling because of that, or are we seeing things in the blood work that is because of some nutrient deficiencies? I like to be able to tie both those things together, and but that's me as an individual being very passionate about both sides.
You're also well educated in this stuff too. And I suppose
Right.
that's the tricky part is there, this is a tricky one because I mean, I think education can come from a lot of realms. And it's funny, Mike Israel and Nick Shaw were on the Renaissance Periodization podcast a little while ago, and they're talking about building brand and whatnot. And they're friends of mine. So they were talking about me and how I grew media. And Mike is pointing out, rightfully so, that I don't have relevant degrees uh, in training or nutrition, right? My actual formal education, I have a honors Bachelor of Commerce degree, and I got into training much later on. Now, I have dove into training and nutrition so much that I've accumulated a very extensive evidence-based education,
Mhm.
and we could actually talk about your credentials as well, because you also decided partway through an exercise science PhD program that it wasn't for you. You didn't
Mhm.
want to complete that after having your master's of science. But is there any sort of way to say, all right, here's a minimum threshold of education or knowledge that people need in order to be able to do a good job with this?
That's such a tough, polarizing question, I feel, because you have the people who have all of the education, and there's probably a few of those who feel that the person like yourself who doesn't have the formal degrees maybe shouldn't be
Mm,
considered the expert. And then you have the other side of the argument as well. I feel that it's hard to put a minimum threshold on it because there are people like yourself who have taken the time to educate yourself through the right sources and the right ways to know just as much as somebody who has the formal education. The formal education, to me, it's obviously proof from an institution that is recognized that you did what you say you studied what you said you studied, but that information isn't necessarily it can be accessed really by anybody. It's just put together in a very organized way from other experts, professors who are giving you the information and testing you on the information, and they give you a grade and so on and so forth. All of the information that I learned could be accessed if you go on to say PubMed or whatever research institution and read the science and pick up textbooks or take certifications and all of this stuff. You can learn it all. It's just hard to organize it all for yourself into a curriculum, but it can be done. And so in the end, for me, it's more about how much time that person has spent educating themselves in one way or another, and how much time do they also have working with people, because there's a lot of people out there who have the degrees who don't have the practical hands-on experience and say some ridiculous stuff as well, right?
let's go to the nutrition one. I think the training stuff is a little bit harder to pin down in terms of like where you're getting education. But I like what you said about sort of curating a curriculum. And I think that actually exists in our industry, and there are people who provide that service. And precision nutrition would be one of the, the gold standards. It's very visible,
Yeah.
very prominent. I think Martin McDonald's
Yep.
MNU is honestly, I think a lot of people consider that one to be the true high
Mm.
level gold standard for nutrition. I know that, and I believe this is one of the things that you have is ISSN. It has an
Yeah.
excellent track record reputation for nutrition education. I recently completed the Renaissance Periodization Level 1 nutrition course. Now they're not offering it that way anymore. They're folding it into something bigger educationally that they're doing. But I did that, and I like RP a lot for their nutrition stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
trying to think if there's any other. I mean, I think there are other things. I would say, from what I understand, Lane Norton and Bill Campbell have something I
Yeah.
think
They're
probably
they're
going to
putting
be
together, I
very,
think,
very.
they're working through the Clean Health Institute or something to that line. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen them affiliated with that. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I know that they've got some educational curriculum there. So, if I feel like I trust an evidence-based practitioner and they do a good job of putting a course together, certification together, and enough people have done it to say, hey, this is actually really good quality, I'd feel pretty comfortable endorsing that list
Yeah.
I just said there. And I think that can probably bring someone up to speed, certainly on doing a pretty good job of navigating nutritional questions for certainly Gen Pop everyday people. I think if you're getting into really high level performance, sport performance nutrition, I think your education probably is going to need to go deeper, whether it's
Yeah.
formal or whether it's you just going right to getting the information that you need, as long as you know the right sources. Any further thoughts on that, on how someone can curate their own education to do a really good job?
Just going to the sources of information that are coming from experts who have been doing it a long time, who have also the formal education themselves, perhaps. So, precision nutrition, John Berardi, PhD. You mentioned Bill Campbell. Bill Campbell taught me a lot of what I know on the nutrition side, because I went and did his master's program, and now he's putting on some courses and maybe putting together something as a whole big course to do. Well, you're probably going to be getting a lot of the same information that I got during my studies, because I studied under him. So, go into those types of people, recognize experts that are going to put out great information. That's where you really want to be going for your own, if that's something you're trying to brush up on.
What about you in deciding, hey, finishing this PhD program wasn't aligned with what I wanted?
So the story there is, I started the PhD program. It was actually also a dual PhD in exercise physiology and nutrition. I got there. I did a full year there. Yeah, and I liked it. The education piece. There was, to be completely honest, I felt like I was repeating a lot of things that I had learned previously in my master's program.
Mhm.
What really turned me off was just the environment of publishing research wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and what I wanted to be involved in for my career and for my life. What I really enjoyed was working with people and putting the science to the test and finding what's practically working, what's agreeing with what the science is saying, a practitioner. And there's a lot of great PhDs out there who are doing both. Bill Campbell's one of them. Lane Norton is one of them. All the people we just said, where they're doing both education at a research level and practically working with people. But just the maybe it was the institution I was involved in, or the research group I was involved in, and I won't mention any names, but there seemed to be this focus on how many publications can you put out, almost at the expense of, is what you're studying with these studies or these research publications even worth looking at. It was almost like, how can we take what this person said and just shift it very ever so slightly a couple of degrees so that we can put out another publication and answer this question that maybe wasn't even that relevant to the population that they were studying, if that makes sense. And so there was this pressure to sort of conform to that, and I just wasn't interested in doing that.
Academia status games. I've not
Exactly.
lived in that world,
So
but I know enough
it
about them.
it exists in the same way like social media can become just like a status thing, and how can you sensationalize your posts to get the most likes and following. It was almost the same game with publications. How many publications can you put out so that you can say, hey, I'm the top dog because I've published X number of studies, and that's double what anybody else, in the industry has done, and so therefore I am the alpha here, you know.
You allude to social media, and we talked a little bit about this before we got on. It's worth mentioning with a little bit of time you have left. What's your philosophy towards how you've approached and built social media?
My approach has just been that I'm going to, there's an approach of being sensational and putting out, um, you know, fantastic, eye-catching headline type of bits to get people drawn in, and maybe even sort of bending truths to get people to listen to what you have to say. Obviously, there's the route of attacking other people and trying to pick apart anything that you can find that they might have said wrong, or that is going to get a lot of attention. For me, it's just always been, how can I put out information that helps people? Um, how can I try to simplify things for people when it can be so confusing out there? And that's just the route that I've gone. I've tried different mediums, like whether it be reels, whether it be the Twitter screen cap type of thing, whether it be the infographics. I think recently I've sort of settled into a groove of infographics and those sort of Twitter like messages, just because they seem to be effective at putting out some good information to people that they can consume. But Instagram's always evolving. I'm not on TikTok anymore, but that's just been my approach. Put out good information, and hopefully it reaches the right people and the right ears and the right eyes.
An underlying theme with both what we talked about with your choices about education and with social media is the time cost benefit of any action we take. And I have ridden the horse of Twitter style posts to near death for over 4 years to
Yeah.
continued and sustained success. And just despite knowing the potential for video, I see a lot of people doing very mediocre reels that don't catch, and then a few people do reels so well. Like people I know, like Beth Varaco and Eric Roberts. There are a couple of people.
Hmm.
Jordan Syatt's great at all of this media stuff, and they're
Yeah.
just of his friends of mine. Or another friend of mine, Steve Keen. He's based out of the UK, and I've never seen someone grow as fast on Instagram as Steve did with his reels. He weaves
Yeah.
humor, a British accent, self-deprecating humor, sexual innuendo, and he's just got a format and a formula for the way he does his social media. I'll bring him on the podcast in the not too distant future to talk about it. And he went from about, I think, 4,000 some odd followers to over 800,000 in under a year. Like,
Wow. Yeah.
which I've
Yeah.
never seen at that pace before. That's
That's
absolutely absurd. And his stuff is resonant. It does very, very well. And I don't think I would wish that upon myself, because I wouldn't want to deal with what comes. I think there's a tremendous amount of potential value in having that size of an audience. And I do encourage trainers to lean in and grab, bigger audience. But I've been enjoying the pace that I've been doing it at, because I've been able to manage it while managing all the other things. So there comes a cost with just sheer magnitude, scale, and reach that I think people have to come to terms with.
yeah, it is. I could imagine that it would become overwhelming really quickly. I've grown slowly. I don't have a huge following,
You've
but
done well. You've done very, very well.
but even that, it's like if I had just gone from even know 200 followers to what I have now overnight, it would be probably really overwhelming. So to hear somebody go to 800,000 that quickly oh my gosh, I mean, you probably have to hire somebody just to help you manage the inbox, right? And just to manage all of the comments and all that stuff. And I think it just depends on what it is that your goal is with your social media. If your goal is to be very media driven with your company and put out a lot of content, and that's going to perhaps trickle back down into sales of whatever it is that you have to offer, then that's great. If what you're using social media for is more of like a obviously to help people, but almost like a resume of what you believe in and who you are, putting out your ideas and things like that, then the growth might be, it might be smaller, or it might be slower. Because to put out really good like reels and videos, like I almost feel that you really need like a full-time media team to manage to
Mm.
put out that kind of content. A lot of times you need to hire somebody to do videos for you and all of that stuff. And so I'm not willing to do that yet. So that's why I haven't done it. But yeah,
You know what? It can feel that way. I think
yeah,
I'll put up a counterpoint just for the person listening who wants to do video and feels, oh, well, there's no
sure,
point if I don't have those resources. And you get the Sam Suliks who
sure.
defy all that. No thumbnails, very raw, very basic, just captured video
That's
of him
right.
just saying whatever. And then, I mean, I don't like these type of, I'll call them charlatans, but you're the people who walk through grocery aisles to
Oh, sure.
oatmeal or spinach or whatever. And all they've done is they've done the cell phone camera, walking in, talk about some sort of thing that they're like, oh, they're demonizing, but they sell something on their website that's similar. So I think ultimately, if you're good at hooks, if you're good at emotionally resonant messages, if you, I don't know, you just have a little bit of charisma with video and you learn as you go, I still think a lot of people can, with relatively limited resources, still do it. I do agree with you. I think that if you're really going to take it seriously, I think it can become very time intensive. So my time cost benefit equation is, hey, listen, I'm going to take some sort of thing I've written, thought about, whatever, share it as a graphic, like a Twitter graphic. Doesn't take me much time. I throw it up, and then I have the time to actually try to respond to a lot of the comments. Like if there's
Sure.
some are just like, emojis, whatever. I'll just give them a little emoji back. I like to let people know, hey, I'm here. But if someone messages me, I want to give a very thoughtful response. So
Yeah.
I want people to go follow you and check out more of what you're doing. I like your media, very evidence-based, very credible. So where can people find you?
We can find me primarily on Instagram at Andres C. Vargas, and there's an underscore at the end. I have a website. I'm actually in the process of sort of revamping and putting out a new website. But the website right now is www.thestrengthcave.com. You can also reach that website through my Instagram, but that'd be the primary way to get in touch with me. If you want to send me a DM or anything like that, I'm always happy to chat. And once again, I appreciate you so much for chatting with me today, and it was a great conversation. Hopefully, we can meet up in person.
We likely will in future travels, especially if you get out to any of these conferences that I tend to spend a lot of time at. For everybody listening, A, please go support Andres. I love what he's doing. And two, and I've been saying this on the more recent episodes, I really want to see growth, significant growth in 2024 with this podcast. I want to get it in front of more people. I'm trying to hit on themes that are going to be a little more accessible to the everyday user in addition to coaches, while still, serving the coach audience that I've had for so long. So please take this and share it with someone in your world you think would really get a lot of benefit out of it, whether it's a coach or a lay person. And I appreciate you guys for continuously tuning in. Anyone who stays to the very end, I know is very devoted. So, guys, thank you so much. Tune in next week.